We're exploring 7 more cornerback prospects for the Buffalo Bills in the 2025 NFL Draft today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of the Herd Mentality Substack, co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, co-host of the NFL First Read Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, folks, welcome in. Yesterday on the podcast, we discussed 7 cornerback prospects for the Bills in the 2025 NFL Draft. Today, we're going to explore 7 more, a batch of 7 corners. And again, not necessarily my highest rated corners, but my objective here is to discuss prospects at positions of need for the Bills in the draft that they could consider in the top 3 rounds. And so we will complete our cornerback conversations today. Now, we might circle back if there's some buzzy names or some hot names that surface in the coming weeks. Maybe there's some players the Bills have expressed some interest in with a visit or a pro day or something like that. You know, we'll certainly get to them. But for now, this will kind of give us the bulk of our cornerback discussions in terms of who those realistic options are for the Bills in the top 3 rounds. And of course, this is all about creating the Bills 2025 draft board, something we do every year here on the podcast. So if you're new this year, welcome. And I'm excited for you to see where this ultimately lands. But we're getting into 7 different corners today. Jahdae Barron out of Texas, Azareye'h Thomas out of Florida State, Maxwell Hairston from Kentucky, Jacob Parrish out of Kansas State, Dorian Strong from Virginia Tech, Denzel Burke out of Ohio State, and we'll talk about Travis Hunter out of Colorado as well today. All right, let's get into it. Again, we'll talk a little background information, talk about the size and athleticism, and then we'll really focus in on 2 questions for each prospect. Why should the Bills consider drafting this player? And number 2, what concerns are there about forecasting this player to the Bills? And then at the end of this, I'll rank all 14 of the corners that I've discussed and give you a round grade for each of them. All right, let's start with Jahdae Barron out of Texas. Good football player here. 5'11", 194 pounds. He's got short arms, 29 5/8 on the arm length, 9.5-inch hands. Relative athleticism score of an 8.81 out of 10, so good athlete here. Production notes, 2,617 career snaps, 8 interceptions, 24 pass breakups. Did have 5 interceptions this year alone in 2024. For his career, he's given up a completion percentage against his coverage of 60% and a passer rating against his coverage of 61. In 2024, it was 34.2, so he had a great season. He's 23 years old, turns 24 in December. In high school, he played wide receiver and cornerback. So why should the Bills consider drafting this player? Well, there's a lot of Trent McDuffie, I think, baked into Jahdae Barron. I think very similar body types. You know, that was kind of a concern with Trent McDuffie was the arm length, but I see a very similar body type altogether, and a guy that in Trent McDuffie that, you know, initially kind of pegged as an inside corner, but really validated himself as an outside player this past year for Kansas City. And I think for Jahdae Barron, similar type thing where you don't really have to label this guy a slot only. I think he can certainly handle his business on the outside. In fact, that's really where he played for Texas. Really love how instinctive he is. I mean, this guy really understands routes. His route recognition is terrific. Definitely a player that has a good feel for coverage, like processing route combinations, capping routes, squeezing into throwing lanes. He can really cover however you want him to do it, whether that's in press coverage, off man, zone. I don't really have any concerns about any coverage technique that he can play. Like I said, versatile player that can play in the slot, doesn't have to be a slot only. It's not a trap that I'm going to fall into with Jahdae Barron. I love how physical he is. He's got a dense build, like I said, 5'11", 194. There's some density to that frame, and you can see that really show up on tape with how balanced he is, how coordinated he is, how firm he is when he's challenged with physicality. I like his body type. I wish he had longer arms, but in terms of the density of his frame, I think he uses it to his advantage. Loves to hit, loves to tackle, no concerns about that part of the equation, and he's extremely high football character. This will be a guy that has the Bills DNA for sure. Process guy. Listening to him speak, you can just sense that there's a maturity there, and there's a love for the game that I think any team's going to love. So what concerns are there about forecasting him to the Bills? Well, length, right? You wish he had a lot more length at his disposal because the reality is length matters. It increases your margin for error. Our margin for error in coverage, at the catch point, tackling, all of those things are limited because he doesn't have much length. I mean, realistically, you'd wish he had 2 or 3 more inches on the arm length, and he just doesn't have it. And so there's going to be some limiting factors that really decreases his overall margin for error, and I think that's notable. And he's also a trade-up guy. This is not a guy that I think has a chance of making it to 30. I think you'd have to trade up to, I don't know, middle of the first round probably, if we're being honest about where he's ultimately going to go. So heck of a ball player. Don't necessarily think he's going to be a player that the Bills can stick and pick at number 30 overall. All right, let's move on to Azareye'h Thomas out of Florida State. He's 6'1.5", 197 pounds, 32 3/8 on the arm length, 10-inch hands. So, boy, he slapped together nice. I mean, those are just checking boxes. Height, weight, length, hand size. We got it all. We got it all here. His relative athleticism score is an 8.09, 1,575 career snaps, 2 interceptions, 15 pass breakups, allowed a completion percentage for his career of 53% and a passer rating of 80.6. But in 2024, his best season, the passer rating allowed against his coverage was 50.2. Young guy, 20 years old. He doesn't turn 21 until June. His older brother plays for the Cowboys, Jahdae Thomas. He was like a supersized safety out of Georgia Tech. And in high school, he played both sides of the ball, offense and defense. So why should the Bills consider drafting Azareye'h Thomas? Well, press man coverage. I mean, this guy is terrific in press coverage. Really, really, really strong hands, firm hands. Can really create jams at the line of scrimmage with his ability to punch and just freeze receivers that are trying to get into the route stem. So if you want to play press coverage, this is a player that's going to be very, very attractive for you. And he chokes out routes early on. There's no question. And, he maximizes this physical skill set that we talked about with the height, the weight, the length. It all shows up with how he plays press coverage. I think his ball skills are better than the production. You probably heard 2 interceptions and 15 pass breakups and thought, man, I wish there was some more ball production. I kind of get that, but watching him on tape, I see a good awareness to the ball. I see the ability to locate. I see confidence driving on the football. So I think that's something that, while the numbers aren't really there, I think the film reveals a better story than the numbers indicate. He's physical. He's a willing tackler. So he plays to that weight class. You get a big corner, you want to play like a big corner, and you get that out of Azareye'h Thomas. And I think there's a ton of upside with him. Young player, and we talked about it, not going to turn 21 until June. Super athletic, just an ascending talent that got better every year at Florida State, played his best ball in 2024, and he's young, and he's got a really dynamic physical profile that makes him very, very appealing. So what concerns are there about forecasting him to the Bills? Well, I talked about him having length and athleticism, and he needs it. He's a guy that's still developing instinctively. The route recognition is certainly not his strength at this point. And so kind of the opposite of what we talked about with Jahdae Barron, where, his margin for error is decreased, and it works out for him because he's highly instinctive. It's like the opposite for Thomas, where he has a big margin for error because of length and athleticism, and he needs it because he's not always technically sound in terms of pattern matching and where he's supposed to be. So there's still some processing development that needs to happen here. He's also got high hips, right? He's a taller corner, 6'1.5", so his hips are a little higher, and so that makes it a little bit more challenging for him to transition, flip his hips, turn and run, plant and drive. When you have those higher hips, it's just a little bit more challenging. And of course, when you're talking about covering dudes that are running routes and know where they're going and you don't, you're looking for anything that would be challenging for the player to be able to stay in phase. And I do think that it presents some level of a challenge for him. It's just those transitions are just going to take a little bit longer, which creates opportunities for separation out of breaks for receivers. So a lot to like here. A lot of upside, still some room for development. The Bills typically like that. And I think the Bills are kind of picking in the right range to consider Azareye'h Thomas. So I think he's firmly a possibility for the Bills in the first round. All right, we're going to talk about a bunch more corners on the other side of it, including this Maxwell Hairston, who's pretty intriguing, and Jacob Parrish, who's one of my draft crushes this year. We'll get into all of them and more. Folks, be sure to stick with me. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. Love to pick my favorites. I got my eye on a few underdogs this year, and FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. You can stay in the action. There's tournament games happening almost every single day, and there's always something exciting to bet on. Even if your bracket is busted, you could still get in on all of these games that are coming up and find the different bets that you like over at FanDuel. Plus, it's easy and fast. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly. There is no waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. All right, folks, let's keep talking corners. Obviously a position of need for the Bills, right? It's Christian Benford and Dane Jackson, Jamarcus Ingram. I think we'd all like a better option than either of those two. So we'll keep working through some of these ideas for the Bills in the early rounds of the 2025 NFL Draft. Next up, Maxwell Hairston out of Kentucky. 5'11", 183 pounds, 31-inch arms, 8 3/4 on the hand sides. RAS score of a 9.62, ran a 4.28. So this guy can really run. 1,068 snaps in college, 6 interceptions, 10 pass breakups, a lot of completion percentage against his coverage of 64%, and a passer rating of 72.7. 21 years old. He turns 22 in August. He did miss 5 games in 2024 with a shoulder injury. And I'll be honest with you, if you really want to see Maxwell Hairston at his best, I encourage you to watch some 2023 tape. When I learned that he had a shoulder issue in 2024, actually, I would say almost all of the film I watched was from the 2023 season, where I think you saw the best version of Maxwell Hairston. Played receiver and corner in high school, also basketball and track. So you love the multi-sport athletes. He certainly does all that. His cousin is Taiwan Jones, not the Bills' Taiwan Jones, the linebacker. There was 2 Taiwan Jones in the league at one point, and he's got some NFL bloodlines to be mindful of. So why should the Bills consider drafting Maxwell Hairston? Well, if you love aggressive football players, that's Maxwell Hairston to a T. Everything he does is aggressive, whether it's flying into a throwing window to break on a football, whether it's being really competitive. He's 5'11", 183 pounds. There's a leanness to his frame. You don't care about it. He's really willing to mix it up with any receiver throughout any phase of the route. When he wants to support the run and play downhill, he will fly around. I mean, he is aggressive in how he plays, and there's something easy to love about that. I think he's got really good vision in zone coverage, that ability to drive on the ball. He likes to hunt. He's definitely that type of guy where you get him at a half turn, looking eyes in the backfield, reading routes. He's going to drive and be very aggressive to go break on the football. And I think he's got really, really good ball skills. He's a guy that can really, really invade the catch point and has a ton of confidence in how he competes at the catch point. So it's easy to like for sure. And he's got speed to burn, sub 4.3 speed. You need a guy that's going to be able to match steps with any receiver. He can certainly do that in terms of a speed element. So what concerns are there about forecasting Maxwell Hairston to the Bills? Well, there's a risk-reward element to his game, right? If you're that aggressive and that much desiring to bait throws and drive on the football, you're going to give up some stuff, right? So you got to live with some of that. I think with Maxwell Hairston, you wish that he was a little bigger to match his style. 5'11", 183, that's kind of a slender build. And so, for a guy that is going to fly around and loves to be physical, and if you hear people talk about run defense concerns, that is true in 2024 after he returned from the shoulder injury. So, we got to contextualize that a little bit, because I saw some comments about that, and I'm like, well, he's playing through a shoulder injury and returning from a shoulder injury. Watch him in 2023 and tell me this guy can't play the run and tackle. But for a guy that is eager to do those things, you'd like to have a little bit more bulk on that frame to be able to do it at a higher level and really be able to sustain himself. You don't love that he plays that way and he's lean and had a shoulder injury. And then, this kind of on the down low, I had a hard time finding a ton of information on this, but apparently there was a sexual assault allegation as a freshman that needs to be vetted. Not much that you're going to be able to find on the internet. I happened to check with somebody about Hairston, and they kind of just put it out there. And I was like, oh, really? I had no idea. I didn't see anything on this. So, whatever team drafts him needs to vet that out and see the details on the sexual assault allegations at Kentucky. All right, let's talk about one of my draft crushes, Jahdae Parrish out of Kansas State. 5'10", 191 pounds, 30 7/8 on the arm length, 9-inch hands, RAS score of an 8.75. 1,608 snaps in college, 5 interceptions, 19 pass breakups, a lot of completion percentage of 51.5 and a passer rating of 66.2. He turned 21 years old in February. In high school, he played running back, receiver, and defensive back. Also played basketball and track. Two-time state champion in the 100 and 200 meters. And his brother is a wrestler at Nebraska. So, Bills and wrestlers, they kind of like that. Now, he's not a wrestler, but his brother's a wrestler. So I'm sure that's something the Bills will be mindful of. So why should the Bills consider drafting Jahdae Parrish? He reminds me a lot of DJ Reed. And not just because DJ Reed also went to Kansas State, but size profile is nearly the same. And just the way that they compete. And I think DJ Reed and Jahdae Parrish are both very sticky in man coverage, that ability to mirror and match steps and stay connected. Very, very sticky. I think that's the prevailing word when I think about Jahdae Parrish. He's sticky in coverage. I love him in press, that dense build. You wish he was a little taller, but 5'10", 191, there's a density to that frame, which I think leads to good contact balance. He's firm through contact and can really stay square and not get bumped easily by receivers that are trying to displace him and play through that contact. Fast feet, fluid hips, no concerns here about his ability to match steps and really pivot and turn and hinge. He's got all that flexibility that you're looking for. And he's got dynamic ability to close. When he wants to plant and drive, he can really, really be dynamic with his ability to trigger and get downhill as a tackler or get downhill into throwing windows. So what concerns are there about forecasting him to the Bills? Well, his ball skills are just okay. I think there's an element to his game that I wish was better when he has chances to make plays on the ball. And then he's a very physical player, but as a tackler, he's got those latch-on tendencies. Talked about this yesterday with some of the prospects where, when you tackle somebody, you want to get square, you want to, wrap up, aim low, run your feet through. Jahdae Parrish, there's certainly times where he's content to kind of just latch on to the side and drag him down. And, that's something that just shows up on his tape that I think is hard to ignore. But overall, a lot to like about the coverage profile and how he plays the game. I think DJ Reed is really just a very good comparison for him. So that is Mr. Jahdae Parrish. Let's get in Dorian Strong out of Virginia Tech. 6'1", 185 pounds, 30 7/8 on the arm length, 9 1/4-inch hands. RAS score of a 6.97. Ran 4.5 in the 40 with a 36-inch vertical jump. He's played a ton of snaps, 2,770 snaps, 7 interceptions, 28 pass breakups. For his career, allowed a completion percentage of 45.5, passer rating of 60.8 against his coverage. He just turned 23 earlier in March. Played wide receiver and corner in high school, also competed in track, and his father is a competitive weightlifter. Why should the Bills consider drafting Dorian Strong? Well, he's a technician, very instinctive. I like his ability to recognize patterns and respond appropriately. I think he's versatile. I don't think there's limitations to the coverage techniques that you can ask him to play. When I say that, I mean press, off man, or zone. I think he can do all of that. I love his willingness and eagerness to be physical. comfort when challenged. He's definitely not a guy that's very panicky, has a good feel for where the ball is going to be and competes for leverage at the catch point. There's a competitive toughness to him that I really like. He strains and contests everything that happens on the field, and he's a good tackler and a good run support player. There's a nice baseline skill set here across the board and a lot of experience as well. You can kind of sense that in the way that he plays. So what concerns are there about forecasting Dorian Strong to the Bills? You just wish he had a little bit more mass, a little bit more length, a little bit more speed. You know, I feel like there's a high floor, but maybe a lower ceiling with a player like this. And he's, to me, kind of like a third or a fourth round type guy where I don't think you would go into a draft thinking, let's get Dorian Strong in the second round, and that's going to be our starter. I think it's a situation where you would either want to double dip and also get Dorian Strong, or, hey, the value didn't make sense with how the corners fell in the draft, and you thought there's more value at another position, and this is kind of your fallback option if you don't get somebody earlier in the draft. So maybe you trade up into the third round type situation for Dorian Strong. Good player, but like I said, high floor, which is good, but also I think there's kind of a low ceiling here as well. All right, on the other side of it, we got more to do. We'll talk about Denzel Burke out of Ohio State. Got to talk a little bit about Travis Hunter, even though I don't think there's a chance he's a Bill. And then I'll give you my final, for now, cornerback rankings. Of course, there certainly could be more players that I wind up evaluating. We'll give you that all here on the other side of it. Folks, be sure to stick with me. All right, folks, let's keep the conversation moving. We'll talk Denzel Burke out of Ohio State. 5'11", 186 pounds, 31 3/8 on the arm length, 8 3/4 on the hands. RAS score, we don't have the RAS score, but we know he ran a 4.48 40-yard dash. 2,619 career snaps, 4 interceptions, 28 pass breakups, allowed a career completion percentage of 56.6, passer rating of 79.7. He's 22, turns 23 in November. Why should the Bills consider drafting Denzel Burke? Well, he's an experienced player with a baseline skill set and coverage. Yeah, I think there's a savviness in the way that he plays. You know, just a know-how guy, if that makes sense. You'll love his physicality, urgent to play the run, urgent to tackle, love how he competes to get off blocks. I think as a guy that I think is more of a depth player, and this is more of a fourth-round option for the Bills, you feel good about the immediate impact on special teams, that he'll come in and do all that type of stuff. He's got that type of demeanor and play style that says, hey, low-level starter, but impact special teamer. And I think a lot of times that's what you want in your depth. Good click and close player, so plant and drive. And I think a lot of that projects well to zone coverage. What concerns are there about Denzel Burke and forecasting him to the Bills? Well, I don't think there's much of a man coverage profile to get excited about here. Struggles to carry routes vertically down the field, and just that overall mirror and match talent I think is kind of missing. His ball skills do underwhelm as well, so you don't love that, right? Modest man coverage profile and modest ball skills, you know, those are missing elements from his game for sure. And again, he's more of a double dip option. You know, you think about him early day 3. If you want to double dip, or boy, if you strike out and you feel like you got to get something at corner, I think this is the type of player you might target early on day 3. I think he'll be a useful depth player, but you know, I do question the upside as a starter. All right, let's talk about Travis Hunter out of Colorado. 6 foot, 188 pounds, 31 3/8 on the arm length, 9 1/8 on the hands. Do not have an RAS score for him. He didn't participate at the combine. I don't know if he'll do something at the pro day or not. I don't think you can watch Travis Hunter and have an ounce of concern about his athletic profile. 1,871 career snaps on defense, 7 interceptions, 16 pass breakups, a lot of completion percentage of 53% for his career, and a passer rating of 61.9. In 2024, his passer rating allowed was 39.9. He turns 22 in May. He was the number 1 overall recruit out of high school the year that he entered college, started at Jackson State with Deion Sanders, and then went with him to Colorado. So 1 year at Jackson State, 2 at Colorado. Why should the Bills consider drafting Travis Hunter? Well, he's just a rare athlete with football instincts. I mean, I think that's probably the highest compliment I can give a prospect. A rare athlete with football instincts. Just unreal ball skills. You watch him play, and he just comes out of nowhere to make plays on the ball. Just unbelievable instincts and ability to play with vision and just get to the ball. He can bait throws, and I think he's going to be a big-time turnover machine in terms of taking away the football. And you see a lot of special plays, a lot of special talent, and he's never really committed to playing a side full-time, right? He plays receiver and corner. I don't know if that's really going to work out in the NFL. I think if he's going to be a two-way player, it'll need to be full-time at corner, and then there's a package for him offensively. But just watching him play, it's blue chip talent in every sense of what that means. It's a rare player. And where you really get excited is kind of getting him to focus in on one thing and what that can unlock from his game, because in the split role, he's just unbelievably dynamic. And that's what football's about, right? Making plays. You got to make plays. Travis Hunter just makes plays and just pops. Just the type of player that you can just feel when you watch a game, that guy's different. So what concerns are there about forecasting him to the Bills? Well, for all the good things that I said, I don't think he's overly refined as a corner or as a receiver. And that's to be expected for a guy that's never honed in on one side of the ball. I do think as a tackler, there's some drag down tendencies. And really what it comes down to is the concerns about forecasting him to the Bills would be that you'd have to give up so much to get him. To go from 30 to probably like the top 5, nobody should be doing that for a non-quarterback. So not a realistic target for the Bills, but we're talking corners. I got to talk about Travis Hunter, a guy that's going to be a potential top 5 pick. So there you have it. I've talked about 14 different corners so far on this podcast between today and yesterday. Let me give you my rankings and where they all grade. So I have first round grades, like firm first round grade on Travis Hunter, Will Johnson out of Michigan, and Jahdae Barron out of Texas. Those are first round grades. Then I have a bucket of late first, early 2. That's where I would put Maxwell Hairston out of Kentucky, Trey Amos out of Ole Miss, and Azareye'h Thomas out of Florida State. Those are late 1, early 2s. And that's where the Bills are picking. And I think those are very realistic players. If you're thinking about who the Bills could draft at 30 overall at corner, those are names that you should get real familiar with. I think those are realistically options that will be in play. Then firm second round grades, I have Savone Revel out of ECU, Darian Porter out of Iowa State, and Jacob Parrish out of Kansas State. Then third round grades, Zy Alexander out of LSU, Kobe Bryant out of Kansas, Dorian Strong out of Virginia Tech, and Benjamin Morrison out of Notre Dame. And then I have the fourth round grade, an early day 3 grade on Denzel Burke. The player that gives me the most concern about where I have them ranked is Benjamin Morrison. I'll be honest with you. I wonder if I'm sleeping on him because I really like this tape, but it's just like, you're a little smaller than I thought. I don't know how dynamic of an athlete you are, and you have a hip injury. But if he winds up being really good, I would not be surprised. So just being candid with you, I wonder if I'm a little low on him, but those elements kind of pushed him down over guys that I just feel a little bit better about the overall profile. And one thing that I've said repeatedly is that I kind of take a risk assessment approach to scouting players because I don't have all the information, right? I've never met any of these people. I've never spent time with them. I've not talked to their coaches or people around him, right? It's a missing piece of what I get to do with the information I have. And so I try to take the information that I can and then compare it to historical norms and give myself the most likely outcome for a prospect. And it's really about risk assessment. And so that's something that I really factor into the way that I grade. And so those elements for a guy like Benjamin Morrison pushes him down. Savone Revel out of East Carolina. That's a player I love on tape. And I think, like I said, like in an ideal world, I think he's like a top 20 talent, but he's 24 and coming off of an ACL tear, and you just kind of think about those types of things and they seem a little risky to me, right? So that's always something to be mindful of when I talk prospects, at least how I approach everything. So there you have it. There's 14 corners. Like I said, if we get more, if there's players the Bills have for visits, or there's a buzzy name, or I maybe miss somebody in the process, I'll go back and do them. But for really setting the foundation, and we can circle back as necessary, this is kind of where I'm at with the corners. Hopefully this gives you a good idea for, all right, if it's going to happen at 30, who's realistic? If they're going to have to trade up, who are those names? If they wait for day 2 to get a guy, who are the options, right? So hopefully this kind of gets you primed and ready for all of that, which is less than a month away at this point in time. So coming up next, we'll talk defensive tackles. I'm excited to get into those players. We'll do the similar type thing for that position group, as in addition to edge and wide receiver. We'll fill in the blanks with some of the other position groups as well. So a lot of draft talk coming your way here on Locked On Bills. Don't miss anything. Make sure that you're subscribed. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills. And I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.